McWilliams Wines wanted to market a white wine, and they wanted to call it Big Mac. And McDonald's got very upset about this because they thought, well, wait a minute, we can't have a Big Mac. We can't let McWilliams Wines market something called Big Mac because we already have something called Big Mac. And hand up everybody in this room who's eaten a Big Mac at some stage.
Unfortunately so.
Yes, I'm guilty too. So it went. So ultimately, what they tried to do is McDonald's initiated some court action based on a number of different legal grounds. The first one was the tort of deceit. The second one was breach of copyright, and the third one was a misleading and deceptive claim under Section 52 of the Trade Practices Act, the Commonwealth Trade Practices Act. So it went through various levels of court litigation, ultimately ended up in the Supreme Court of New South Wales, and then the Court of Appeal, and then the Federal Court, and I think it went all the way to the High Court. But ultimately, the action was not allowed, it wasn't successful. And the main basis was a very common sense ground, namely that when you buy a bottle of white wine and take the cork out, regardless of what it's called, and in particular if it's called Big Mac, you don't open up the bottle, look inside and expect to see a hamburger in them. So the legalities, very, very interesting, and I think in this context, obviously the legal system has a role to play. It was very, very interesting that our two wonderful speakers made reference to that aspect of consumer protection law as well. Sometimes things like the Fair Trading Act and the Trade Practices Act are described as social justice in action in the marketplace. So I think it's useful to have those particular regulatory frameworks that you both talked about during the discussions. So what we're going to do now is launch into some Q&A, and we've got a roving microphone, and I think the first question is Charles.
So you can cross the microphone.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Charlie Bradley. My question is about activity that we might be engaged in. You mentioned the government, and presumably there's that regulatory approach, and the what's the place now? And the
what's happened to the sound? The sound's gone. You switched it off? Switch it on.
Turn it up.
No.
it's going up and down.
It was on before.
It was working a minute ago.
It was on before.
It's called You want to use this one?
Come forward.
Just come down, Charles.
Okay, what I'm concerned about is what we can do as part of civil society, like as consumers, but also in a more general sense, and what sort of consumer organisation, so the organisation of people involved in their roles as consumers. You've referred to it, and good on you, seems to me, to be going along that path, but I'll need to have a look at it. Could you comment a little bit further about that sort of process of organising people together so that they might work together? And one that's affected me has been the poisoning, the way in which grocers have poisoned me over the last, 70 years, because I've eaten baked beans over that period of time, and they've poisoned me with this salt content. Why has not the salt content of Australian baked beans been reduced so that I might live longer?
Maybe they're conspiring with the marketeers of blood pressure drugs.
Yes.
So I don't think there's any one simple answer. I think, of course, there are many, many things that can and should be done. And sometimes people will set up an opposition between action as a consumer and action as a citizen. And I firmly believe that they should reinforce each other, that the more we can draw issues to people's attention as consumers, the more interested they will be in the issue, and they might take action as a citizen when they vote and in between elections. There's two things I wanted to mention. I mean, one of the things I didn't get to say before was that I suppose the problem isn't exactly supermarkets. For me, the problem is more the food industry, and so it's the supermarkets and their suppliers, the larger suppliers, who kind of, between them in various ways, contribute to the problems around public health, or too much salt, or too much sugar, or whatever it might be. And so supporting some of the alternative mechanisms that are, were there in the past, like cooperatives, and perhaps emerging, that they're still battling along, some of them, but also some more of the sort of healthy delivery services, like Ubi is one in the sort of central parts of Sydney, and there's a Food Connect in Brisbane is an even bigger and more successful version of the same thing. So those sorts of green shoots I think are quite promising. And then on the other hand, which is where Good On You is coming from, we recognise that people have a lot of things in their life and they're not necessarily going to be activists tomorrow. We're targeting the sort of middle group who are concerned but not concerned enough to put all the work into finding out which product is best or which not. So our mission really is to make it as easy as possible to know we want to make it as easy to know that ethical or health issues around a particular choice as to know the price or the quality or the features. And that's sort of our mantra. We're only operating in a very small sector at the moment, only online at the moment, although we have some ideas about offline. So, and we're only really doing clothing and personal care products. So we can't help you all with supermarkets at this stage. Our aspiration is that we will one day.
Oh, sorry. A few issues here.
Thanks. Look, I'd just quickly say boycotting supermarkets isn't going to work. You could all boycott supermarkets, they wouldn't notice, they'd laugh. Because you're not going to get the mass of people, they really have no choice, there's convenience. But what you can do is work with supermarkets. I think the fact that we have this sort of, animal welfare issues, Coles around pork products is extraordinary. It just shows what can be done, because what's happened, that's not their idea that they thought we'll come up with that. People have approached them and suggested there might be some more humane animal ways. They've seen straws in the wind, that people vaguely concerned about this, they can find, use competition to drive change for the things that you want. And that very competitive situation between the two of them and Aldi can actually drive a lot of change in a mass market, and they do all the explanation and the marketing around it. So that would be one part of it. The other one would be alternatives, and it is just, encourage schools to have vegetable markets, find alternative ways to do food. So actually, 6 days a week people might eat from the supermarket, but 1 day a week they might actually explore something different. And through that there is a learning and an understanding and whatever. And in terms of the salt, many food companies, they are reformulating food and reducing the salt, but they just, they do it gradually and incrementally, because and there's examples where they've done it overnight and they just lose market share. So obviously there's an education piece, but actually I try not to see the big guys as necessarily bad. Every business is full of people who want to do better things as long as they can maintain sales. And I think that is possible, and encouragement, working together, does work, as well as boycotts and more direct action.
Yeah, g'day, Brian Concannon. The way you gave your speeches, we used to one speech, but you intermittently did a couple each. I thought that was great, really good. And what you were saying, sir, about specials influencing people, I can fully agree with that. I reckon 10 to 20% of the time I'll see a special, I won't, it'll go to waste. I won't use it. Psychologically induced. Just wondering your thoughts on Coles and Woolies, Aldi's, they're making plenty of profits. But what about the suppliers? They're getting screwed. What are your thoughts on that? And as well, the One World Government New World Order seems to be trying to break down any competition, break down small business. Do you think the Coles, Woolies, Aldi's plan is to break it all down and then eventually price will go up, skyrocket?
Thank you.
So I think I touched on this briefly about suppliers. I think we can't talk about all suppliers being equal because some of the suppliers are bigger companies than Coles and Woolworths. I mean, two of the biggest suppliers are Procter & Gamble and Unilever, which are two of the top 100 companies in the world. And then you've got some really big agribusiness companies as well. At the other extreme, you've got smaller farmers and smaller businesses, and that's where I think the problem is. So I think you need to separate. I don't feel, my heart doesn't bleed for suppliers collectively, but I am concerned that small suppliers don't get access to shelves because of the ways they do business and the pressure they put on people like to do specials and so forth that Mr. was talking about before. So I do think there's a problem there. The government's response, or the industry and the government's response, has been this code of conduct which comes into force right now, this month, last month. Will that work? I'm not super confident. So I don't think there is an obvious solution. They are big, powerful businesses. They play mean. How to make them be nice? The government can't decide which suppliers get access. And I think it's a very tricky problem. Christopher might have some better ideas than me, but I find that a very tricky question.
Yeah, I'll start off. I went into Aldi 5 years ago and I found a folding bicycle on a special and I arrived on it today. So I love those too, don't worry. I was just coming here today and I told someone I was doing and they said, oh, I feel guilty when I find a $1 cabbage on special in a supermarket. And I said, well, look, you don't know. Maybe the farmers had a bumper crop. Maybe they're making a good margin on $1 cabbage. Maybe it's seasonal. And I think that's the point. We don't, suppliers might be given a tough time, but that doesn't mean, I think the market is tough, and food market is particularly tough. And as I've said, I think there's an argument that we need to look after our interests. Now, if that means, if we're going to demand cheap food, and that's what we seem to be doing, and if it's cheaper than the cost of production, that's not sustainable. And certainly when you see, carrots at 99 cents. I mean, I'm always struck by actually how cheap a great deal of food is. And again, if you look at the real costs of producing it, certainly in terms of water and whatever, someone's paying, or the environment's paying, or whatever. So I would hope more education, more knowledge, more awareness of the costs. But that doesn't answer that question. I just feel that the market is the way that determines it. And when you have the concentration of these two, they have enabled the real pressure to come down on suppliers, but at the same time that has led to great efficiency and productivity. And again, when you're losing a job, you don't think productivity is necessarily a very good thing. So it depends where you sit on that. Competition is really at the key of it, and that's why I think we need, everyone says we need more competition, but competition always does come at a price for people.
Yeah.
Next question, please.
Unfortunately, the roving microphone doesn't work. The battery has gone flat. So if you have any question, you need to come around here and then collect the microphone. Maybe you can line up if you like.
My name is Gabrielle. I have a question concerning labeling. I found the labeling very not precise enough. And especially when we talk about low in fat or good for you, even the hard tick seems totally flawed. And also you don't know where the things are coming from. Orange juice made from local and imported oranges, and it's all just so difficult to read everything, and also everything is so small written. So you have to take, a magnifier with you and all that. So you would think that there would be scientists and people in the know that would be deciding how the labeling should be done, and no changes on that side. It seems very imprecise.
No GMO labelling, that's a crime.
I don't know, Christopher, I completely agree. I mean, I think that labelling is inadequate. First point is, of course, we live in a country that has a very strong free market ideology, and any sort of interference in telling business what to do is seen as bad. On this particular point, it's really, I get kind of very annoyed about that argument, because, providing people with information in a standardised form that they can understand is essential for competition to work. So if competition doesn't work unless people are able to make informed choices. Same thing with the ethical issues, when we've got Senator Richard Colbeck from Tasmania, who often raises this issue about we shouldn't let consumers know where the wood in their chairs comes from, because they might not buy it if they thought it was Tasmanian forests being destroyed. That's luckily that particular flag he fires doesn't seem to go very far. But so first point, I agree that labelling can be better. Choices forward, long and hard for better food labelling. In fact, it's been one of Choice's big successes, the food labelling that you do have, the nutrition panel and so forth, was something Choice fought for in the 70s and 80s. So I would certainly think that in that particular area, regulation is a very important thing. The third thing is the opportunities we have with modern technology to even crowdsource information about things. There's a very interesting app that I should use but don't use, called MyFitnessPal, because I'd be fit if I used it, which crowdsources the information about food. Everybody taps it in. So I think that obviously needs some initiative from a consumer organisation like Choice or something, but there would be ways to get information that wouldn't fit on the back of the pack. I mean, you can't have everything on the back of the pack in big writing, because we'll run out of pack, and that's an argument that the industry likes to use and consumer organisations like to argue against. But there is a limit to how much you can fit on a pack, so we've got to be able to provide information in other ways, whether it's on your phone or on the web or something like that, in a way that's very convenient for consumers.
Yeah, look, packaging is imperfect. It is a battle between the labelling that is used for marketing and the labelling that is used for information. The nutrition panel I find very useful, but a lot of people don't really understand what it is. We're getting a food star system now, which will help people make choice, but again, this is a very vexed issue, because of course having a picture of something natural, or a sheep or a cloud or whatever, makes people think that it's good. And I was actually at Costco a couple of weeks ago, and there were some people saying, barramundi, Aussie fish, and they were selling it, and I said, where's the fish come from? And they said, oh, Vietnam. And but look, it was actually very good barramundi, and it was $17 a kilo, and actually they snap freeze it in a way that makes it comparable to fresh fish. So actually I thought that, and they were open about the labelling that it came from Vietnam, and it was an Australian company based in Massachusetts, so the label went on and on. The point is, we live in a globalised world. Many foods, packaged foods, are made up of many different ingredients that come from many places, and it changes over time with seasonality. It can be better, it will be better, but it's not always straightforward.
No, this is where I'm going to disagree. I think that the food industry pulls the wool over the government's eyes on labelling, and they get away with murder on country of origin, and on the front of pack thing, it's taken 5 years, and the scandal involving an ex-food industry lobbyist being the minister's advisor to even get to where we've got to on front of pack labelling. So that's just a fight that you have to fight.
But I just have to say, the news today was, this was raised about the Chinese berries and the so-called hepatitis C. The testings come back and the berries were clear. That was a very small story in today's paper. The berries are fine.
That's how I'm going to answer. And on a good note, the thing about, I was talking to a food industry guy when I was at Choice about the nutrition labelling, and he said, it's not very important. Only 20% of consumers read the nutrition labelling on the pack. And I thought 20% was a pretty good result.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 8 o'clock. We're going to take the 4 questioners who are lined up there, and then that'll be it. So the next question is Mark.
When Aldi first opened in Australia, compared to now, they had quite a
quite a small range of stock. And I remember reading about 10 years or so ago an article in the Herald which was talking about how even then, compared to Germany where it started, the Aldi in Germany has a far narrower range of stock, and that the custom culture for shopping in Europe generally is to just get your basic goods like pasta and rice and toilet paper and a few things like that, detergent and so on, and then you still, most of the cheeses and all those sorts of things, people still go to specialist delis. So I was wondering to what extent that's due to different regulation systems, that they're allowed to supermarkets have a lower range of stock than in Australia, or whether it's more due to culture in Europe, less that's more of an Australian thing and maybe American as well, the tendency to shop in big supermarkets. So how much of that would be due to cultural differences, and how much due to regulatory differences between Europe and Australia?
As an Aldi regular, Gordon's asked me to answer this. When Aldi started, they had about 800 SKUs, which means lines, which different products. I believe it's about 1,200 now, so they have widened the offering. As far as I understand it, it's not a question of regulation, it's a question of responding to the market. And I did have a meeting with the CEO of Aldi, and they always said, their proposition is simplicity. So they'll always go for the simple range. So instead of stocking, 40 cheeses, they'll have 10 cheeses. But they'll make sure they're good cheeses. I suppose the only sense in terms of regulation with Aldi in that sense is liquor, where Aldi have expanded their liquor range. You can't sell in New South Wales liquor directly in the supermarket shelves the way that you can in the UK. It has to be in a separate area. There's been various objections from Coles and Woolworths to Aldi expanding their line, particularly in areas of lower socioeconomic areas, which, again is one of these vexed questions. Why should poorer people not have access to the same cheap booze that better off people do? There might be very good reasons for that, but again, it's a vexed one. So, all the supermarkets, Aldi, they respond to the market and they find their niche and their point of difference, and Aldi done it, and they sell worm farms and all sorts of things to surprise people as well.
About the European thing, there probably is something in the culture, and there probably something is in regulation. I don't know much about Germany, but in France there are certainly regulations protecting smaller kinds of businesses, like bakeries in particular. But I don't think it's the case that you don't find large supermarkets in France and Italy anyway. Perhaps not in Paris, but in some of the smaller places there will be a big Intermarché, or the other one that's even bigger, which I can't remember the name. Carrefour, which is one of the biggest companies in Europe. So they do have some big supermarkets as well. They just don't have the same level of dominance as in Australia, it seems.
Thank you, Craig Sarleen. Thank you so much for unpacking the different aspects of what the two supermarket issues are all about. And I'd like to try and bring us back to this question, which I think is quite complex, about what we do as a consumer. You've talked about the concentration of market power impacts, squeezing out of the small retailers, the effect of vertical integration, private labels, the cross-integration with other industries, hardware, petrol, etc. From that perspective, much as I love Ross Gittins, the idea that we can just sort of focus as consumers on our interests seems a little bit narrow to me and a bit unsatisfactory. And I agree that boycotting supermarkets isn't necessarily what you can do, but if you don't support the small retailer, they will go out of business. So it is kind of a bit important in your practice, I would have thought, to not simply make your judgment on the basis that Ross Gittins seems to be suggesting. They're a more sort of multifaceted way of looking at it. And that's, I suppose, more of a comment. But the question for you really, because we didn't deal in it too much, is what I see is the really insidious impact of loyalty programs. And the fact that they not only operate, there's all the data collection, the targeting, all of that we know, but it's also the way that it locks you in, or locks the consumer in, to not only a particular supermarket or a supermarket chain, but it's the cross-integration, Qantas points, all the rest of it. It's all geared to exacerbating exactly the problems we're talking about small retailers and all that sort of thing. And so I'm kind of wondering whether one simplistic thing you might do as a consumer is never join a loyalty program.
You could say that. I join every loyalty program because as a consumer activist I have to know how they work. And actually there are some loyalty programs using technology that actually work for smaller retailers as well. And while there is always a price to pay for the loyalty programs in terms of your data, I think as long as they are transparent about what that is and what happens, that can be fair enough. So, yeah, it's... I'll pass on. I wrote something down and I'll read it and I'll get back. Yeah.
You remember what you wanted to say. I don't agree. I think like loyalty programs suck. I'm with you. I think they distort the market, and I think they make take advantage of your, putting a nice little carrot in front of you to get the behaviour that you want. So I'm all for. I mean, shopper dockets are the same thing. And what I don't understand is why an 8-cent shopper docket is a bad thing and a 4-cent shopper docket is okay. So it seems to me if the 8-cent one is a bad thing, then they're both bad.
Yeah, well, what are you going to do? Ban them, or is it anti-competitive?
Well, they're anti-competitive. Why not?
I just say, you ask what consumers can do very quickly. This is what I think you can do. Supermarkets succeed because people are very conscious of time and they think they're very busy, and they're very conscious of money and price. You can go to alternatives, but it's going to take you a bit longer, it's going to cost you a bit more. You have to admit that. But I would say that, in that consideration, you might actually spend less because you are less subject to the marketing and the discretionary spend that inevitably happens when you buy folding bicycles when you went to get some milk. So, I think that there is an argument you can make to not go to, every other time you will go to an independent, not to a supermarket. But you actually have to give people a way that works for them to do that. And I think that if you look at, say, Michelle Bridges with the fitness programs or whatever, they've got people to change their behaviour in certain ways with the rewards. I think to wean people off supermarkets, not 100%, but say 20% or 25%, that's a pretty good start. And I think you can make a good argument in terms of there's no great sacrifice of time or money, and actually you'll be exposed to different things. That can work well. And there was one campaign about shop locally recently, although that was from American Express, so they had their own, they're another big company.
Oh, thanks very much to the speakers. I probably want to go to a more fundamental problem that this whole issue arises from the fact that we live under monopoly capitalism. And as Karl Marx pointed out 170 years ago, it's all been proved true. We've now got a duopoly in Australia. So how are we going to tackle it? Well, I think that we're going the whole wrong way on the production and the industry point of view. In every field, in the airlines industry, the Labor government sold off Qantas. What a disaster that was for the consumer. Then they sold off the Commonwealth Bank. What a disaster that was for us in the banking industry. And now the Baird government's about to sell off our power industry. And meanwhile, in the federal sphere, which has not been really commented on much at all, is Medibank Private, which I don't support private medical insurance myself, but it has had an impact in keeping prices down. And Malcolm Fraser said that. So my point is this, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the whole lot's got to go, and we've got to go to socialism. That's the only way to solve the problem in the long run. We've got to do that. In the short run, why don't we do what is happening in some countries, is to establish a government supermarket chain. And I've seen this operating in Latin America, and it actually does challenge the right of these private monopolies to operate, and it actually does have an effect on keeping. So it's good for the consumers, but it's also, in the long run, part of a change of the whole system. When I think we just can't accept this Coles, Woolworths, duopoly, and so on. In the long run, we're going to have to change the whole mob. But I think we've got to change the neoliberal agenda, or begin to change it, by reversing the privatisation insanity that's taken over this country and the whole world, and go back the other way. Let's establish a government supermarket chain which will set prices, will set up prices which will challenge Coles and Woolworths. That's the only way to do it as far as I'm concerned. Thanks.
We'll come back next week and do a month on that. I'll just say some very quick things. Grocery choice was something we were involved, which was a Rudd government campaign to give transparency around prices and intervention. It cost $4 million. The ACCC ran it for a while. Choice got the contract to do it. Craig Emerson, who was the minister, pulled the plug just before we were about to start, because actually you couldn't get the prices, you couldn't get the transparency over that. Actually, you gave me a very good excuse to tell me one of my favourite supermarket stories, which was going to the, in Mongolia in the 1990s, going to the Harrods of Mongolia, which was the government department store stroke supermarket, and going into the first floor, and it was a massive edifice comparable to Harrods in Knightsbridge. And there was nothing on the first floor. On the second floor, it was full of blackberry jam from Hungary, which had come under a barter system exchange for minerals from Mongolia. So I'm afraid I've not been very impressed with government-run supermarkets.
I like to believe that you could have a government-run supermarket, but we're not going to have one next week or even next year. So what can we do in the meantime? And that's where I think that exploring the cooperative model is one part of the solution. But I'm going to finish there because Howard's stopped paying attention, so we must have finished.
No, didn't we have... Wasn't there another question?
Retired.
There was another question. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Chris and... I can say this on behalf of our audience and on behalf of the committee that, gentlemen, you've illuminated our awareness of choice, both in terms of making that fundamental choice that you began the discussion with about whether we go to our local supermarket or whether we go to our local corner store. But you've also enhanced our awareness of choice within the supermarket. And I think Charles's point was a very important one, and I'm grateful for your response to Charles's question, in particular, the question of baked beans. I think we've all largely grown up on baked beans. And I noticed that in Woolies, I still love my baked beans, but I always buy those salt-reduced baked beans. And that raises that fundamental question. By how much is it reduced? I've got no idea. It tastes the same as conventional baked beans. But to what extent does it legitimately extend our lifespan? And Charles, I want to see you live till you're 100 because you're a national treasure. And I'm going to do some research on that and come back to you next time I see you at Politics in the Pub and see if I can give you some advice on the extent to which the salt-reduced baked beans might maximise the prospect of all of us living to 100. But gentlemen, thank you so much for your great work, and in particular we wish you well with your ongoing work, because as consumer activists you've got a gigantic brief and you're discharging the responsibilities of that gigantic brief admirably, and we wish you more power and more energy and ongoing commitment and passion to your very, very worthwhile cause for humanity. Thank you very much.